It's going phenomenally well. It's really been the best respiratory launch in the recent history, if not ever.
I don't know if I missed something, I can elaborate.
You got it all, I think, because the path to market was very clear there. The focus of the company really shifted in 2020 to be not necessarily not European-based, but US-centric. We also became a little bit more US-centric with our investor base. Execution is the key. I mean, Verona is the perfect example of execution. We didn't create new science, we just executed on science that had been there, and then we created value from that. But execution's hard. It requires discipline. It requires focus. It requires a lot of commitment, because it's very easy sometimes to see the new shiny object or the new thing over here, and you lose sight of what the main path is.
Bienvenue to a new episode. I'm your host Philip, and on this show, I'm interviewing the best Europeans in biotech to help you grow. One of the best stories in biotech at the moment is Verona Pharma. This UK headquartered biotech was able to bring its fully owned drug on the market in respiratory disease, COPD, and it grew its valuation 120 times in the last 5 years. Went from $50 million valuation to now $6 billion. It is now the 7th most valuable biotech in Europe. So I talked to Chris while he was in Raleigh, North Carolina. I didn't know him personally, but I know one of his colleagues very well, and I've been following Verona for the last 10 years. We talked about the commercial rollout of their drug Ohtuvayre. We also talked about the British roots of the company and why execution in biotech is everything. So here's my conversation with Chris, and please hit the like and follow button if you're enjoying it. All right, welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks, Philip, for having me. Look forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, very exciting. I want to start with the commercial rollout of your lead product, Ohtuvayre. I mean, it seems like it's going very well. So can you tell me a bit more about it?
Yeah, it's going phenomenally well. If we think about it, it's really been the best respiratory launch in, recent history, if not ever. If we fundamentally go back to why Ohtuvayre is launching so well, it goes back to a lot of the early work that we did, which identified a tremendous unmet need within COPD. Many of these patients who are dealing with a chronic progressive disease are continuing to have persistent symptoms, and those symptoms manifest as dyspnea or trouble breathing, and that leads to them not being able to participate in life. So a drug like Ohtuvayre that provides the bronchodilation and long-term non-steroidal anti-inflammatory effects has been very appealing from a physician standpoint and a patient perspective, especially since you're adding novel pharmacology to the space, which they haven't seen in a long time. So, I think that's been the driver of the launch. As you guys have seen, we just announced our Q1 earnings with over $71 million in net revenue, 25,000 dispensed scripts, over 5,300 writers, and again, in a very short period of time. So,
And a strong growth compared to Q4 last year as well.
Totally. If you look at Q4, it's about almost 100% growth from a revenue perspective. Our dispenses grew significantly. Our new patient starts are over 25% higher than what they were in Q4. We added over 50%, approximately 50% more writers. So every metric that we have is growing at a very high rate. And I would argue that, again, going back to the initial commentary, the unmet need and a profile of a drug that looks like Ohtuvayre are driving it.
Yeah, that's great. And I've seen also that the peak or the sales estimate and the peak sales is really high as well. I think, I mean, it's obviously always a bit hard to forecast exactly, but I've seen it's in the billions. I've seen even one analyst was predicting in the 3 billion peak sales, which seems like.
Yeah, I think from a Catalyst perspective, we have a variety of different peaks. From I think consensus peak is somewhere around 3 billion now, and we have higher than that. I think if we just look at the market today, based on our pricing, based on the gross to net that we have, 1% patient share of these 8.6 million patients in the U.S. are treated is about $1 billion in revenue. So And from our side, it's very hard for us to understand why Ohtuvayre can't penetrate the market based on what we're seeing early, 4, 5, 10%. There are other products that have done that. Trelegy's over 12% market share, Symbicort 22, and the pharmacology is not unique. So from a long-term setup, I think we're in a very good position to continue to create value.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Actually, that's what, and one thing that is really amazing, and there's very few biotechs who manage it, especially let's say biotechs with a European background, is that you manage to bring it on the market without any partner. You fully own it. I mean, you have signed in China, but at least in the US and Europe, you fully own everything, and you make the commercialization yourself. Which I think that's amazing opportunity, basically.
It's been a great opportunity. The company I joined in 2020 with Mark Hahn and Dave Zaccardelli, and a little bit after they joined. And I think from the beginning, we always were preparing to do this ourselves. And I think fundamentally, I believe that biotech, small biotech, mid biotech can compete with large pharma if you have the right resourcing, you have the right funding, you have the right product. And from the beginning, we were always well financed and well ahead of what I would say the normal commercial cadence is. Now, we did it disciplined, but that allowed us a lot of flexibility, and I think has played an integral role into launching the way that we're launching right now.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. And one thing you mentioned a bit the competition, but at least that's one thing I saw that seems like the competition is pretty strong. I mean, the like we are talking about, like, I mean, I saw Trelegy, it's a Symbicort, it's like billion-dollar drugs as well, launched by Astra, by GSK. I guess they're also and it's quite fierce competition in established. How do you look at it?
Yeah, I don't look at, Ohtuvayre is different. Like, I don't look at any of those as competition, because the way Ohtuvayre, or the way we've gone to the market, is these doctors are looking for things to add or help their patient today. And so, like, if I was Trelegy or Breztri, which launched in the last 5 years, in order for them to gain market share, they have to take away from something else. Now, our scenario, we understand what the doctor's dealing with, which is, and everybody does too, but they're dealing with a chronic progressive disease, and they're used to adding therapies. And at some point, they run out of novel pharmacology to help these patients. And we don't have to displace a Trelegy or a Breztri. We can be added to those, or we can be added to an Advair, or just a llama. And it allows for those drugs to exist while us being added to them to help these patients long term. From a physician perspective, that's a really nice approach, because it allows them to kind of keep the patient and maintain them while trying to improve them a little bit further. I do think long term that the profile of Ohtuvayre is very compelling for physicians, because it allows them to think about using ICS less, or steroids less. And because you're getting bronchodilation, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory effects in this molecule, long term, I believe that what we've seen in research and heard from physicians is they like the idea of inserting Ohtuvayre earlier, because it allows them to delay ICS, inhaled corticosteroid use, and potentially limit patients' exposure to that while maintaining an anti-inflammatory effect.
Okay, that makes sense. And I guess from a commercial strategy, I mean, add-on, I guess, is already enough to drive the prescriptions. But I guess if you go into that, then in the second stage, and you're really the main monotherapy, or more first-line monotherapy, I guess then it's even more interesting from a commercial point of view.
Very much so. I think as you see the evolution, we want to be first add-on, right? Like, regardless of what background therapy they're on, if they're experiencing persistent symptoms, think about Ohtuvayre as the first add-on. Then in the future, what you can see us doing or being into is, how do we get into that first? How do you provide the first use, or the first drug for these patients that is providing? And that's where our life cycle planning comes into play as well, where we're bringing out or we're developing a llama plus Ohtuvayre or ensifentrine, and that essentially is giving the doctors a dual bronchodilator, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory in one asset, and they'd never seen that before. So that pipeline allows that expansion into, as you described, maybe more moderate, mild patients in a single compound, a single asset versus a multiple drugs that these patients may have to take.
That's and it sounds like it. Yeah, you have the opportunity down the line as well of the next steps. That's good. And I want to go back also a bit. You mentioned about the let's say UK/European origins. I mean, you joined a bit later, but I'm curious if you can talk a bit about the history of the company, because I think they started 2005 in London.
That's correct. It was London based, and really it was the brainchild of a few respiratory pioneers. So Sir David Jack, who had invented many respiratory drugs, and it kind of is his final thing. He wanted to find a drug that could provide he thought that you could create a drug that could provide bronchodilation and non-steroidal anti-inflammatories with one molecule. And so he went about researching and trying to find a compound like this. And one of the main compounds out of this research was ensifentrine. And as you stated, we started in 2005, and over those years, it was looked at in a variety of different respiratory conditions like cystic fibrosis, chronic cough, asthma, and COPD. And then as we moved into the late near 2020, you started to get more data around COPD, and that led to the first indication really being in COPD in the nebulized form. But the molecule had been studied extensively throughout those years, and what was always consistent was how the molecule performed. Regardless of where you were looking at it, always performed from an efficacy and a tolerability standpoint across the indications. And I think when we looked at this asset, we saw an opportunity to really, actually accelerate, highlight a molecule that has tremendous potential because of the mechanism that it provides in respiratory disease.
No, that's true. And also what's pretty cool on the story is that, I mean, you had like very significant investors, especially on the VC side. We just talked before hitting the record button. I mean, I think was invested, OrbiMed invested, Novo Holdings invested as well. And then we're listed in the UK rapidly, but also dual listed on Nasdaq. And what was also really interesting to me was that you also shifted more towards also having like a US team with David joining, and you and a lot of the executives joining as well, and really, I think, also really focusing on the FDA and the US market. Can you, like, I don't know if I missed something, or can you?
No, you got it all. I think the focus there was because the path to market was very clear there. The focus of the company really shifted in 2020 to be not necessarily not European based, but US centric, which allowed for the focus on, we understood a pathway to get the product to market through our regulatory channels. We also became a little bit more US centric with our investor base. And I mean, that all tied together with NASDAQ listing and all the stuff that you're talking about there. And I think, from there it became an execution story. The team did an amazing job. Let's put in context of what 2020 looked like when COVID was happening. So the medical and clinical team was able to execute a respiratory clinical trial during a global respiratory pandemic and produce results that are transformational with Ohtuvayre. And then from there, our regulatory team took and went to the FDA and got approval. So, I mean, it's such an amazing team effort, but also highlights, how execution, when you focus on execution across an organization, how that execution can quickly translate to results, and more importantly for the investors, translate to value creation. Think about Verona in 2020 was a $50 million market cap. And we needed to raise $200 million to do the phase 3 study. That was not an easy ask, but the team and the management did a very good job of getting all of that in place so that we had resources to run that trial. And, you fast forward today, close to a $6 billion market cap. The value creation during that time by focusing on execution has been tremendous.
That's amazing. Yeah. Uh, that's yeah. And I mean, yeah, I mean, I've seen that also on the show quite I mean, it's something also that came back quite a few times. Like once you advance in clinical trials, you need, I mean, deeper pocket investors, and then that's on the US almost exclusively. I mean, at least today. And then also what I heard also often is like that the market opportunity is just way bigger in the US, especially for innovative drugs, just from a reimbursement appetite for, I mean, for reimbursement and for everything. And that's basically European biotechs are not.
It's definitely true. Like you talk about reimbursement landscapes. If we just take COPD, the pricing dynamics are so different between Europe and the US. The US market within COPD is about a $10.5 billion market. The same drugs in Europe are about a $2 billion market. So like it's 5x the opportunity from that standpoint. And, we really, you know, by focusing on the US, you can create value that allows you to go in other regions as well. Like it allows the access for medicines in other regions. But, the driver of, probably revenues across, it's not just respiratory, it's across a variety of different conditions, tends to be the United States as well.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, I mean, it's always a bit I mean, it's a bit sad for other regions, for patients who cannot access the drug as well. But
Yeah, and
that's ultimately the reality.
yeah, I mean, I think it's a reality, but that's where there's things that, companies, I mean, again, everybody explores are there early access programs? Are there ways to work with the EMA or other regulatory agencies to provide access to drugs that are truly innovative to patients? I mean, this is not a respiratory or a Ohtuvayre specific issue. It is a macro issue across all organizations today. So, it's just something that I think, from our side, we try to create the evidence to support value. And we did that tremendously during launch with the trial, but also looking at some other things post-approval. And I think you have to be able to tell that value story across different regions, not only the US, but across Europe, China, other regions.
And how is it going with Europe now? I think you have applied as well for the.
We're, from a European standpoint, from a Verona standpoint, we are, actively engaging with the EMA, looking at how that approval pathway is. Our ultimate strategy, though, within Europe is to partner. As you mentioned, we'd become US centric, and there are certain partners that have more expertise commercially, regulatory, clinically in the regions that we feel is beneficial for making sure that Ohtuvayre reaches its potential in an area. It's why we partnered in China. We felt like Nuance provided those expertise to allow us to best serve the patients in that area. So while we're engaging, while we're engaging with the EMA, we're also actively, kind of exploring partnership opportunities that can bring this novel pharmacology to the different regions.
Yeah, makes sense. And yeah, and one thing that I was wondering as well, from what I heard, at least from the EMA, that they love the head-to-head trials as well. And I've seen that you didn't do a head-to-head trial. So is that a hurdle?
I think that's something we'll discuss with the EMA. I think, from our stance, I mean, to be fair, we didn't ask for EMA guidance when we went into the phase 3 trial. We went in and we felt a better approach would be to come to the EMA with the data and then talk about how that data supports an approval. And that's the approach that we took. And I think our team has been successful in the past with those type of approaches. If you look at the enhanced trial, we have cohorts that represent comparison cohorts. There are patients on LAMA, there are patients on LABA, there are patients on LAMBA ICS. So you can, while maybe not the direct way that the EMA wants, there are ways to show uh, difference between cohorts within the enhanced program. And I think what we've shown consistently is regardless of background therapy, Ohtuvayre provides a significant benefit to these patients across all metrics. It doesn't really matter the background therapy. When you start inhibiting PDE3, PDE4 in a patient, that pharmacology doesn't discriminate to what the background is.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Yeah, yeah, and I guess also that it's not just for the. I mean, I guess the approval in Europe is easy. I mean, easier to get, but then it's the reimbursement.
The
Which is more
reimbursement's
challenging.
yeah, because each region's a little bit different, and how they look at the trial and the cohorts and the value is different as well. And as we talked about earlier, the way they've looked at COPD is probably incremental. It's interesting to see how they'll look at biologics from a pricing standpoint there, because the biologics started in more small diseases and now moving to respiratory with Dupixent. It'll be interesting to see how that pricing dynamic is affected with novel pharmacology as well.
Yeah, yeah. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, okay, yes, exactly.
And can you go a bit more on the? I mean, on the clinical data, I've seen that you will release or present quite a few posters soon.
Yeah.
But I've also seen that the phase 3 results were actually really like clear and really strong data. Could you go a bit like
Yeah, from a phase 3 perspective, if you look, Enhance 1 and Enhance 2 trials, our primary endpoint was FEV1 0 to 12 hours. That endpoint was met in a highly statistical fashion across both trials. I think the other things that we saw were consistent improvements across all lung function measures, peak, trough, and then we also saw improvements in symptoms and quality of life. I think the other thing that was really important out of that trial was, while not powered to be an exacerbation trial, not enriched to be an exacerbation trial, you nominally saw a 40% reduction in exacerbations across these trials in a patient population that is probably more like the real world than an enriched population. So, with the combination of those results, I think really were the foundation of the excitement of this launch, right? Like those results, like we can't launch a drug it's hard to launch a drug that doesn't clinically provide a lot of benefits. And, the profile of Ohtuvayre between the lung function, the symptoms, and the exacerbation data is very compelling. And I think the other thing that's probably we probably don't talk about it as much, is the safety profile. Sometimes you get novel pharmacology and there's some trade-offs from a safety profile standpoint. When we look across all the phase 3 program and even early phase 2 work, the safety profile is consistent with placebo. So you get this novel pharmacology with very limited risk for these patients. And so if we go back to like the positioning as add-on, like it's not hard to add something on that doesn't inherently potentially give you much risk on the other side. So that
especially compared to corticosteroids, where you have
very much so, like the pneumonia risk. And the interesting thing with steroids, I think, well, physicians understand some of those risks, thrush, other things that may happen. What's interesting is when you talk to patients, like, patients, we forget sometimes how they look at stuff in a singular box. So inhaled corticosteroids are very different from oral steroids in their side effect profiles. They both have risk. But a patient has a very hard time delineating between the two. So they lump all steroids together and they think of all those risks associated with them. So the idea of Ohtuvayre being able to provide this non-steroidal anti-inflammatory really is appealing from a patient perspective, because it eliminates some of those worries that they have on a day-to-day basis of the drugs that they take. They may be rational or irrational worries, because sometimes, like, we're not always rational human beings. So but by eliminating that, it also helps with compliance. It helps with people taking drugs. It helps with a variety of things that are all problematic when you deal with chronic diseases. Chronic diseases, patients have trouble staying on therapy. Well, if you can provide drugs that have a high benefit to risk profile, it potentially can encourage that long-term adherence as well.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, especially any drug, I mean, any chronic drug as well, if you have mid longer term side effects, which I guess, I mean, especially in CNS or can happen, it's
Yeah.
very problematic. Like,
Very much so, yeah. And, you're dealing with in COPD, a patient population that, there's a lot of comorbidities. Like, they're not just COPD patients. They have cardiovascular disease. They potentially have diabetes. They potentially have uh, like mental health issues. Like, this is a complex patient population that isn't just taking COPD meds. So that is an important aspect, not only for the physician when they're looking at drugs, but also the patient.
yeah, yeah. That's good. Switching a bit to finance. I mean, you mentioned the market cap 6 billion, which is amazing. I've seen even an analyst said that was one of the best stories in biotech, which I've not seen too many analysts saying that, which I think must be very flattering as well.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of fun times with that, but I mean, it goes back to execution. You create
Yeah,
value by executing on a vision and giving a product that has a great benefit for patients out there. So it's been fun.
uh, and one thing I saw as well was that I think in Q1 you were basically profitable or just profitable, which I think is also really, I guess, a big milestone compared to 20 years of burning cash, or almost 20 years. Like,
Yeah, and it's, we're only nominally 2 quarters in. I think the way Mark Hahn phrased it, where operating run rate, our cash flow run rate is at if you take non-cash charges out of there, is positive from a run rate standpoint. And that's a really, for the long-term health of the business is a great place to be
yeah,
as we move through the rest of the year.
yeah. And especially what we just discussed as well, I guess. I mean, from the commercial rollout, but also all the discussion you have with partners, you have way more leverage, I can imagine.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, from the beginning, we wanted to, if you think about the financing strategy early on, it was, and even the preparation strategy was, we have to prepare, like, we have to finance, prepare, execute as a single company going to launch a product no matter what. And that gives us, as you discuss, more leverage regardless of whatever conversation comes out. Because if you're financed properly, that people have an understanding of, you can execute, you can go do whatever you need to do on your own. It's not a necessary, you have to have a partnership to be able to execute. I think Mark Hahn has done a tremendous job in, making sure we've had financial flexibility through these 5 years, but also doing it in a way that has maintained the value for the shareholders, the non-dilutive financings that we've done through either debt or royalty, which I think you've seen recently, where we paid back the royalty, the RIPSA,
ahead of time. Like,
ahead of time, so that we could take that burden away, but also put us in a position where we've still have the financing in other avenues to be very supportive and, how do I say it? Very supportive, but also forward looking in our launch approach.
uh, uh, yeah. No, that's. I mean, I think also from we listen a lot on on the show of people and what I've seen as well. I mean, that's the ideal scenario. I mean, if you can be, as you said, also if you can line up the finance, the data, everything, and if you can launch on your own without a partner and capturing most of the value, and that's where basically almost all the big home runs in biotech happens. I mean,
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some exceptions as well, but it's.
Yeah, they start with, I mean, for me as a commercial guy, like, I'm a science guy on the side, I guess, but like, as a commercial guy, we need three things. Like, for a good launch, we need an unmet need. Like it's smart. Like you can have the best product in the world, but if there's not really an unmet need in a marketplace, it's a little hard. Actually, not a little. It's a lot hard. You need a great product, and so like you can launch, but to be transformational in a disease category, you need a great product. And then the last thing, which I think you've mentioned on the Europe side, but even in the US, you need a pathway to access and reimbursement. You need a pathway to be able to get a product that meets an unmet need to patients as quickly as possible. So that access and reimbursement side is valuable across. And so with Verona, I think we have all three. We have unmet need, great product, and the way that we're reimbursed in the United States under medical benefit allows access. So though when I looked at this 4 years, 5 years ago, it was like you don't usually there's some gaps in that, and there was so much continuity across all three of those things. It makes for it allows for a lot of a momentum on the story as we move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Actually, it's a good pivot as well to more your personal background. I mean, I wanted to ask also like on the why and how it happened that you joined Verona. Like,
Yeah, I mean the biggest why for me, um, as I've gotten later in my career, I'm not that old, but I've grown in my career, the importance of the people you work with is critical. And I had a relationship and worked with Mark Hahn and Dave Zaccardelli in the past. And so the initial interest in Verona was around the people. I knew kind of who they were, what they were about, and their leadership philosophies, and also their story and their success. And so, that was an important aspect of why Verona. But just as importantly was the product and the opportunity. And, um, you know, when I did my diligence on looking at what the product was, how it was different, how the pharmacology could apply to a variety of different respiratory spaces. And then I looked at how the pathway to reimbursement was slightly different than typical respiratory products. That became very appealing to me because it mitigated some of the risks that we have as we go to launch. It doesn't eliminate it, but it mitigates some of the risks. So I think that was the foundation for me. It started with the people, and then the product was a really nice close 1A, 1B. But for me, as we work, and I talk to my team about this all the time, fortunately or unfortunately, we spend as much or more time with the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis as something of our family. And, being able to work with people that you trust, that you respect, and that you can have frank conversations with, good, bad, or indifferent, I think is so critical to driving the business forward. Because when you can have those frank conversations, you can get to underlying root causes of issues, and then you can adjust and find solutions much quicker. And you can only do that if the core conversations are truthful and honest, and that there's safety in having those conversations. And when you do it with people you trust and respect, it can be very special.
I like that. I like especially how, I mean, it's not underestimated, but it's in biotech we have so much the data and the product and the science that I mean, sometimes some people look less at the people aspect, but I think at the end of the day, it's still people, people, people.
There's always the people aspect of this is, I think, even more because the data and the science will always be there. But the thing that we always forget about is there's always something that we don't know or believe or could be a problem that we haven't seen. And if you have the right people in the right room asking the right questions and challenging the process, you can solve anything. I think that sometimes we struggle with, we create in marketing, we call it a little bit of developer's curse. We create this beautiful asset and we believe it's so much better than everything else. And we sometimes have blinders on to what the world and operationally how that'll adapt or integrate into something. And if you can have honest conversations with people, you can attack it from both sides. You create great science that can be operationally integrated into the workflow and into the medical community. And I think that's sometimes we miss that sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. And also what you mentioned, at the end of the day, it's a lot about execution, and when you have the right people problem solving together, working well together, I mean that leads to great execution. Like,
Yeah, execution is the key. I mean, Verona is the perfect example of execution. Like we didn't create new science. We just executed on science that had been there, and then we created value from that. But execution's hard. It required discipline. It requires focus. Requires a lot of commitment. Because it's very easy sometimes to see the new shiny object or the new thing over here, and you lose sight of what the main path is. And so, having leaders that can keep everybody focused on that kind of beacon is a critical aspect to make sure that you execute correctly.
how did you and the rest of the and the executive team, what were some of your lessons or some of the things that helped you keep the focus?
I mean, Dave does an amazing job for us at keep, I call it a beacon or whatever, the North Star that we're trying to go to. He does a very good job of canceling out some of the noise that can occur. And I think that's translated for me and my team of like, what's the ultimate solution that we're trying to get to? And, we have a path to get there. But if you think that path is always going to be a straight line, it's not. There's going to be bumps along the way. But if we can keep that North Star, that ultimate goal in our sights, let's talk about how we still get there, even if there's a little bit of a left turn or a right turn along the way. You do that by aligning on, I think it's alignment first. Like everybody has to believe what that goal is. And then how you align on that, and then you keep it alive over the course of your conversations, your follow through to make sure that people still understand this is ultimately our goal. And how are your activities actually helping drive to reach that goal sooner than what we expected? Because I think that's the other thing that helps with value is executing at a quicker pace than what the world expects. And you do that by being focused as well.
Yeah, that's actually, I mean, yeah, I'm curious also even on the organization, like how did you structure it? Because I was working in the biotech in Switzerland, Molecular Partners, and one thing they quite struggled was I mean, they had the top strategy, but then to align it and to cascade it down throughout the organization and to align everyone was actually like not that easy. Uh,
It's very hard. And from a Verona standpoint, for the most part, for the first couple of years, there was only like 25 of us here. So I think to your point, when it's smaller, much easier to align between a
yeah,
small group of people.
in Swiss they were 150, so it starts to be where it's, yeah, above 100 it starts to be tough.
Yeah, when you start to add more people, that complexity gets in. But the key is making sure that you're, you know, for my team, I think it starts with my leaders being aligned to what I believe and we believe as an organization is the right thing to do, and then them translating it to their team. I think, there are simple things that as a team we do across the organization to keep people kind of focused on what our goals are. You know, I mean, they sound maybe trivial, but I think they make a big difference of alignment with, company meetings that we're updating people across the organization of all things going on so that they know how their contributions are ultimately achieving the big goal. And sometimes that's hard to do because it's a time out of someone's day, but those things I think are really important to keep everybody focused, kind of take away some of the distraction, also highlight how their contributions are contributing to the ultimate goal. On the commercial side, we do this monthly too, of like just getting commercial updates on how we're going from a organization standpoint. It allows the people to be bought in. It allows them to ask questions. I think it also dispels chatter. So like by having those conversations, you actually can quell any noise that's happening out there because we need and we integrate on what we're hearing and we address it proactively. Those things are easy, but sometimes hard because you have to be disciplined to do them all the time.
It sounds simple but not easy.
It requires effort. It requires consistency. I remember my background goes all the way back to being, I was a rep. I was a sales rep, a manager. And, I used to, as a manager, tell my reps, like, you don't have to be the best clinical person. You don't have to be the best salesperson. You just have to be consistent. And consistency wins the day a lot of times because it's hard to be consistent. It's hard to do everything the same and be consistent over time. And you have to obviously have
Consistent and persistent, I guess.
yes, that's consistent and persistent. Like, you're going to get hit with some things that are negative. You're going to have positives. You can't get too high and too low during that time, and you have to continue to kind of push through. So,
I like that. Actually, it's I have also a background. I have a kind of half of me. I mean, I have a foot in tech, or like software tech, and a foot in biotech. And when I was running the first company, we kind of optimized a lot the operations, more with like a tech model. I don't know if you're using like OKRs or like a lot of like project management tools and like tools to align everyone. And I mean, I think they did. I mean, some companies like it came from Intel or Google and did pretty good job to even scale it at tens of thousands of people and to align everyone. But what I was surprised that coming in biotech, then I was like, okay, people were not using any tool. They were running everything on like basically on emails and PowerPoints. It was not clear like whose objective is which and what results and who can take which decision. And so but I was surprised.
and that gets harder as the organization gets bigger because you have more and more layers to kind of figure things out. One of our early philosophies from a hiring standpoint, because we were lean, was finding people that could do a variety of different things. So, my head of sales, marketing, and training had done a whole bunch of stuff. Like, he could do all those things. Like, he has the ability to run all those functions. So as an organization, it gave us flexibility to be lean, but also and it was attractive for people because it gave them opportunities to be very broad early on. And again, as you get bigger, some of that broadness gets contracted. But, I think one of our early hiring philosophies across the organization was hire people that have a broad skill set and, for lack of a better word, are a jack of all trades, an expert of none, but they have enough experience across all these different disciplines to be able to drive the right decisions, right questions, to move forward.
Yeah, that's good. I'm curious, one thing you said about that you are doing the science thing on the side. But how was it for you to not have a background in science? Like,
Yeah, I mean, my background from college was marketing and finance, and my first job in pharma was at Eli Lilly. And at the time, before, back in the day, Eli Lilly used to only hire pharmacists. So I think you learn through your career of how to learn different science components. And as I think all of us on the sales side do, we probably become dangerous on the science side because we know enough to really get the answers. But for me, the science is interesting because the science to me helps me understand commercially where a product can go. My past experience, I worked on a product called rifaximin or Xifaxan in the U.S. That was a non-systemic antibiotic that was initially treated for hepatic encephalopathy. But because we understood the science, we understood that there were other avenues that a drug like this or a molecule like this could go into. So the science to me is appealing because when I can partner with a chief clinical development officer or a chief medical officer to understand how that science could be applicable in other markets, it allows us to really push the potential of a drug. And again, if we go back to Ohtuvayre, one of the appeals is we know PDE3, PDE4 expression or inhibition can affect many respiratory diseases. And so how do you use that? How do you use that knowledge to find the best ways to bring it to patients in need? Is I think that's for me the science side that's fun because you have to understand the science to understand where applicable it could be in other places.
Yeah, like, it's a good example also how you can learn the science kind of on the job and over
Yeah.
time. And
And the easiest way for me over time has been interactions with KOLs. Like, the KOL community in respiratory and every disease category I've been has probably been integral in me getting up to speed. And, they love to teach. They love to tell people and teach people. So having an inquisitive mindset where you ask questions, I think has always been valuable for me or people on my team to get up to speed on the science.
sounds like you're a very curious person as well.
Well, I think we have to be, all of us. I mean, at some point, questions are good because it helps you get to better answers.
Uh, in French, we say curiosity is it can be a bad default, but because there's kind of two sides to a coin. But in general, at least in business, I think it's very
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to not be too curious where you don't do anything. That's like sometimes you ask questions to ask questions, but if you're asking questions and being curious to understand the state of a business to be able to get better, that's a different scenario. And we've all been faced or seen people that ask questions to ask questions. And like, you're not, the goal of a question is to drive a process or a behavior to be better. Uh, and also to help for me understand either a challenge or a hurdle that we're facing organizationally.
yeah. I like that. Have you a last question before like a quick question? One thing you mentioned about royalty. I'm curious if you could expand, maybe not just I mean, with the Verona example, but expand a bit on the royalty model because something that it's not that recent, but seemed to have worked very well. But more recently, I mean, I'm thinking about Royalty Pharma and a few others where they seem to have been extremely successful, and especially in the last few years. Yeah, can you just like how you see it, what you have seen?
Yeah, I think that royalty model, and again, Mark, our CFO, is much more attuned to describing and kind of getting into the weeds on these. But for me, it's a way to provide additional financing that is non-dilutive on an asset that people see potential in. So you're right, Royalty Pharma, there's a bunch of other ones that have had really good success, and there's been success in respiratory using these royalty streams for companies as well. But, in this situation or in Verona's situation, we felt at the time a small royalty deal plus the debt that we had would provide an avenue for cash that was non-dilutive to our shareholders. And what in the long run, what we set up was a way with, I think when you do these type of deals, and Mark is phenomenal at doing these, you want to limit the company's exposure or risk to the returns. So our deal had fixed returns in it, like where there was a cap on the return for them. It was not in perpetuity. There's certain models that you could apply here that would allow you to kind of be beneficial for both parties. But, I look at them as if you have an asset that has flexibility on the margin to be able to get money in that funds operations, royalty agreements, or royalty debt deals are a way that a company can kind of source or fund activities without having to raise any more capital on the back end.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that yeah, makes total sense. Yeah. Yeah, no, I like it. It's a good it's a good way to wrap. So the last part is just some quick fire, some quick questions you can answer like yes, no, one sentence. Um, and just a few minutes. One is like basically what's on top of your mind at the moment.
For my top of my mind is like, we're going through an expansion, so we're adding people. I think you probably saw in our earnings, we're adding more reps. For me, it's how do we keep the culture on top of my mind today? How do we bring the right people in that can continue to keep the culture and the momentum of launch? And Like, that's an important aspect. You talked about growth, culture, and keeping culture is important. And since we're going through a growth phase right now and adding people, I want to make sure that we maintain the culture that we've created.
Yeah, it's a good one. One advice to young life science professionals that maybe want to go into your path.
I would never, that's a good one. Never say no to opportunities to try things differently or do different things. Like, don't be scared to do something a little bit different, because even if it doesn't work out, you're going to have a learning from those activities. And so I would push yourself to try to do things differently or think about things differently and embrace the risk or the uncertainty of it.
Mm. I like that. I guess especially when you have a bit more experience, it's I think
It's
harder.
easy to do, but I do, but like, but and I've always, I mean, from my side, I've always enjoyed, like, I've always felt like you can bet on, I believed in my abilities and confidence and my abilities, that it was easy to bet on yourself. But when you're younger in your career, when I was way younger, I probably didn't feel that way. But I think if I could go back and tell myself in my younger days, I'd say, like, always push yourself to get out of your comfort zone a little bit more than you probably think you can.
I like that. What's one of your biotech or science books?
Oh God. Oh, you just stumped me on this one because I'm not a big reader. I got none. I got none.
No, no. Um, one mistake you made in the past 12 months.
Mistake in the last 12 months. Um, Mistake in the last 12 months. Another good one. Oh man, I wasn't expecting this one. It's not necessarily a mistake, but I think, it, an underestimation, for me is, you know, I'm not gonna say it's not a mistake. It's an underestimation in my mind of I always underestimate, or I tend to underestimate how hard it is, or how hard habits are to change.
Mm,
And I think we talk about a great product, we talk about an unmet need, but we also we always forget that doctors have done the same thing for 20 years. So I think it's not a mistake, it's an underestimation of, like, habit change is hard, and it requires repetition, it requires a lot of consistency, as we if we go back to the conversation.
yeah.
So I think I always underestimate that. And then I relate it back to stuff I do with my kids. And if I ask my son to make his bed every day, which he doesn't do, um, it would be very hard for him to consistently do that, because for the last 13 years he gets up and goes to school. So, like, it would be a habit change for him that would require a lot of extra attention. So I always forget how humans in general, you have to habitually remind people to change them what they've done.
Yeah. And it's a perfect transition to the last question, which is one new habit that you adopted recently. One thing you changed.
One thing that I've changed, I've gotten this is personal, but I've gotten much better at taking time to, like, work out and do other things, which I think, if we think about from a work perspective, I undervalued what those 45 minutes or 30 minutes of riding a bike or lifting some weights, actually provide from a mental state. And it's funny, I talked to my team all about it. Like, I'll not do it for 3 days, and then you do it, and you realize you become clearer. You like, just, and it's a habit. As you work and you get travel, it's hard to do.
Mm,
So I think over the last 6 months, I've tried to make a commitment to try to at least be active a little bit more than I have. And when you're busy doing work, it's hard, but I've also see the benefit of how your mind clears when you actually do it. So
I see you all ring truck.
yeah, yeah. This is a new thing. So I wanted to see how bad I sleep, and I don't like it.
This you can work on it then.
Yeah, it's something I can improve.
Great. Thanks a lot. It was a great conversation. Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I appreciate
enjoyed
it
a lot.
and wish you the best and appreciate the time.
Thank you. I'm impressed by how Chris and his team were able to execute so successfully. I'm also impressed by his deep knowledge of commercialization and his focus on execution. If you also enjoyed this episode, please hit the like, follow, or review button. Any of these actions would help give more people access to the show. If you want to support us even more, you can make a donation by clicking on the PayPal link in the description below. If you want to see similar videos, please feel free to check out our channel where we have many more. Also, I would be curious to hear what you think. So if you could leave a comment wherever you are or shoot me an email at philip@flot.bio. All right, thanks for watching to the end and see you in the next episode.